So here we have another JRPG giant, and that is Dragon Quest XI. Obviously, Dragon Quest is a very large pedestal, especially in Japan. Over there, 7-Elevens are converted to Dragon Quest stores. Outside of the US, it wasn't exactly the most well-known until the last couple years, but now it's really growing in popularity, and the release of this game is, well, a large part of that. Also, now Dragon Quest is in Smash Brothers, if you didn't know, which is huge. And with the Switch release right around the corner, I thought I would look at Dragon Quest XI, released in 2018 for PS4 and PC. It's actually the first main series Dragon Quest game I ever played through. I had played through Dragon Quest Heroes and messed around with the games from time to time, but never actually really got into any of them, and this was the first one I had finished. And so, was it worth finishing? Well, let's take a look at the game, this ultimate critique. Spoiler free, of course. So the plot of Dragon Quest XI is pretty standard for a JRPG. It doesn't exactly do that much out of the ordinary throughout a majority of the game. It starts with your character being born, and he's the symbol of all hope, and he's known as the Luminary. After some shenanigans, you are cast down a river and picked up by a man who basically becomes your father, and then you do a time jump 15-ish years later. You're a grown-up teenager, if that makes any sense. Well, you do this village challenge with your childhood friend, and then are properly told you are the Luminary, the symbol of light and hope in the world, and you will defeat all that is evil and dark, and anything even close to that. So you head out on your adventure. You head to the king to tell him, basically, you're the Luminary, you got the mark on your hand to prove it, and you're here to protect everyone from evil. Well, he sees the mark on your hand that proves you are the Luminary and says, no, you are the Darkspawn. If you exist, then evil will also exist, so he tries to get rid of you. In the dungeon, you meet up with a character named Eric, a thief, and the two of you break out. So your quest truly begins now, as you need to figure out what is wrong with the king and how to stop the evil. The story of Dragon Quest XI, while it may be a bit generic to an extent, I think it does have a decent number of plot twists and turns. Just because it's generic doesn't mean it's all that predictable, as there are a few parts that even threw me for a spin. One instance being the very beginning. Like, I didn't actually expect the king to be an asshole, but he is. I figured it would be some Zelda crap where the king sends you out on your quest. The overall plotline may start out basic enough, but I can assure you that around the halfway mark things actually get pretty crazy and pick up considerably. I really thought the plot was actually really well paced, in addition to just being really well told. I just thought the pacing was slow and deliberate in the beginning, but it ramps up over time, finally becoming just pretty intense near the end. While I'm not going to come out and say this is one of my favorite JRPG stories, I think it is a disservice to just write it off as a generic plot, because there is some substance to it, and I think it was good. It's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, and a lot of people are probably just going to roll their eyes with the entire plot, but I think you should give it a chance, and I think you'll at the very least somewhat like it. And you may be pleasantly surprised by the end of it. Something I will say that was just very generic feeling was the world of the game. Erdrea was not the most engaging world in an RPG. Some parts of it were decently interesting, but a majority of it had a very generic feeling and really didn't do all that much at all. It feels like it was the bare minimum that was needed, and they just went with that. There are a couple locations that I think are interesting and better than others, but a majority of the world is rather quite plain and somewhat benign. Actually, the most interesting part of the world are the parts that are put into the Smash Brothers stage. So don't let its cool representation fool you. A lot of the world in the game isn't exactly interesting. As a whole, the world was one of the weaker parts of the game, I honestly thought. Honestly, the lore in the game, that I obviously won't spoil, was much, much better than the world. It connects back to older Dragon Quest games, and I thought that it was just way more interesting, and it was actually good fan service for a game I haven't played yet. Whoops. I still liked it though. Now, a story couldn't be complete without its characters, and this game has that. While the Luminary doesn't speak, which is standard for Dragon Quest and kind of just JRPGs as a whole, he's pretty much a blank slate for most of the game, which is a little disappointing but understandable. It's the other characters that make up for it. I'd say there's like two tiers of characters. There's your party members, and then there's everyone else. The party members in this game I think are all great. They're all lovable, interesting characters with good backstory, and they actually do get a lot of time to shine. While some of them may start out quite boring, I think by the end of the game they all have something really unique and interesting about them. Literally every single one. I don't think there was anyone who was particularly stronger in terms of character. I thought they were just all generally pretty good. I really came to like all the characters and wanted to see what would happen to each one of them. Even some of the characters that don't start off as strong and I was initially like, I'm not really invested or interested in this character. No, they make up for that, and I was invested by the end of the game, in all honesty. All of them, all the characters for the party. The characters don't have absolutely amazing arcs or drastic changes, and I wouldn't put them anywhere in like my favorite RPG members of all time, but I still thought I would say that they are good. Then there is the other side of the spectrum, which is every character besides the party members. With maybe one, at most two exceptions, everyone else in the game falls into this category, even the main villain. They're all extremely one-dimensional, and that's about all I can look at for the story, characters, and world without spoiling anything, since I don't want to spoil it, because I actually really liked it, and it's a new game. Just know the story is good, the characters, well, the party members are pretty good, everyone else is pretty one-dimensional, and the world is a bit on the weaker side. But overall, I definitely liked it. But hey, let's get on to the gameplay now. So Dragon Quest XI is a pretty standard JRPG. It does have a unique elements, but for the majority of the game, it is a very standard JRPG. In all honesty, Dragon Quest did kind of create the initial standard for JRPGs, not only in terms of plot, but in terms of gameplay also. So it makes sense that it's fairly standard. You explore around worlds and get into fights with monsters. You can sprint, which is nice, because sometimes you just gotta really move, and you can jump as well. There isn't any real platforming, but you can jump just in case you get like stuck. There is some contextual stuff like climbing a ledge or a rope, but generally it's all flat terrain, or slightly uphill, or downhill. You can interact with some stuff around the world, particularly chests with goodies in them, or you'll be interacting with the many NPCs in the game. In the game, you'll be given a general objective to complete, but there are many side missions. These side missions are relatively basic, like bring me something, or kill an enemy or two for me. In terms of main objectives, it's usually about collecting something or going somewhere. This brings us to the mounts and the ship. There is a ship you travel on. You travel on the water. I know, shocking. And it's generally basic, really. However, you actually do get random encounters with the ship. Then there is the mounts. You see, after killing certain shiny enemies, you get the ability to mount them. While riding them, you can dash with them, allowing them to plow through weaker enemies. They also usually have some form of additional movement as well. For instance, the dragons can fly and glide, these other ones can hop really high, and the horses run. These mounts show up a number of times in the game, but they really don't add that much, to be honest. It's more situational than anything else, and it's extremely contextual to the area. Like, they won't even let you leave the area with it. But that's enough about exploring the world. It's time to talk about the main part of the game, the battles. Enemies are not random encounters. Except when you're on the ship, on the water. Shocking. There's random encounters there, but generally, there is not random encounters. You can see all of them when you're walking around the area. Simply run up to one and attack it, and you go into battle with it. The battles are your standard JRPG fare. It is a turn-based battle system. You can have up to 4 party members at once, and rarely you'll have a guest to help you out. You can control all your party members. You can actually freely walk around and move the camera. However, this is purely visual and doesn't actually change anything. You can even switch to the original first-person camera, but I don't like that as much. So in battle, you can do a number of things. You have your HP and your MP. Neither regen without some spells or items. You can attack, which is just your standard attack where you attack with whatever weapon you are holding. You can use abilities and magic. Both of them use MP, and there are tons of different moves. Every character has their own spells and abilities, and these vary greatly, actually. Magic users have multiple pages of spells and abilities like Veronica, including, but not limited to, healing, explosions, fire and ice attacks, tons of buffs and debuffs, and thwack, everyone's favorite move. Or a more physical character will have a bunch of fancy attacks like drop kicks, supercharged attacks, and even more. Literally, though, every character has their own unique spells and abilities, adding great strategy and just differences. Nobody feels similar to anyone else, in all honesty. Some characters can have some overlapping spells, but everyone feels pretty different. You can defend, which is exactly what it sounds like, and you can also use items, of which there are a decent amount in the game. Stuff to replenish MP, health, etc. It's pretty standard. You can even change out your party members mid-battle if you want. The order of attacking is based off a speed stat, but that goes for the enemy as well. You can even set your party members to act wisely, as the game puts it, a la Persona 3, but that's not what I did. I had full control over my party members. The battles are your very standard JRPG affair if you couldn't tell, but Dragon Quest goes out of its way to make sure it's the absolute most refined JRPG battles imaginable. Something totally different about the game, in terms of battles, is the Pepp system. You see, at random increments, your party members will be pepped up. Sometimes it's when you get a critical attack, sometimes it's when you get hit by a heavy attack. It's not totally random, but it's borderline random. While pepped up, you do more damage, your spells are more effective, and you're just better. It's not a ton, it's maybe like 20%, but it is a bit. But the main appeal of being pepped up is the Pepp Abilities. Every character has their own unique Pepp Abilities. These can absolutely whoop ass and are the strongest moves in the game by far. Many of them require multiple characters being pepped up at once, but it's totally worth it. These kick ass in the game and are great against bosses. They even get their own nice animations. They're really the only new thing in the battle system to Dragon Quest, and the only thing that isn't totally standard in a JRPG battle system. Speaking of enemies and bosses though, they're your standard Dragon Quest enemies for the most part. There are a lot of classic ones that return. In fact, I'd argue like every classic one returns, but there is a bunch of new ones. There is well over 300 different enemies in the game actually. A majority of the enemies go down pretty easily though, in all honesty. The bosses are a different story. They provide any challenge that exists in the game. But I'll be completely honest, Dragon Quest XI is a fairly easy game on most fronts. I will say about 90% of the game I had no issues at all. That other 10% is at the very end of the game, and well, that's actually pretty hard. But for the most part, this is a quite relaxed game in terms of progression and difficulty. Speaking of progression, there is that as well. Whenever you finish a battle, you get XP. Depending on the enemies, depends on how much XP you get, and it's pretty standard stuff. You actually only get XP from battles, not from quests or side quests. Side quests give you items or crafting items. Anyway, you get enough XP to level up. It's a standard thing. When you level up, you're given skill points to use for that character in addition to their base stats increasing. There is a board where you use your skill points to fill in the gaps. It's a fairly standard leveling up system. Some skills and abilities cost more than others, like a lot more than others, and they're split up from each other like in sections, depending on the type of weapon or moveset. But every character has completely unique boards to level their skills up. In addition to this, when you finish a battle, all your characters actually get experience as long as they're alive, not just the ones you used. Additionally, there is equipment. You equipped equipment and it ups your stats and gives you bonuses. There is armor, headgear, and 2 accessories in addition to your weapon. There is a ton of equipment in this game, and a lot of it can be created or reinforced. You see, there is the forge. The forge is fairly basic, as throughout the game you find recipes and crafting materials. You can then use said materials and recipes to create new weapons or reinforce your current ones. At least they make a minigame out of the crafting, so that is a little different, but not to repeat myself or anything, it's fairly standard for a JRPG. In fact, if you couldn't tell so far, this game is fairly standard for a JRPG. Dragon Quest prides itself on being the definitive JRPG. It created the traits and the characteristics of a JRPG, and it hasn't changed all that much throughout the years, and this game is no different. But while this game does do many standard JRPG things, and is standard in many aspects, I will say it does them basically flawless. Like, I will say it is the definitive standard RPG. Everything it does great. But that is the general gameplay for the game, I will say. So it's time to talk about the presentation. The presentation in the game is very stylized. It has a little bit of realistic parts to it, but it's generally cel-shaded and kind of cartoony. This game looks great though with this art style, or at least it's appealing to me. It will also age a lot better in the long run, honestly. Everything is really eye-catching and aesthetic. The textures all look great, everything pops out really nicely, and I think it all looks very appealing to the eye. The lighting is also superb and dynamic. The models are all really crisp and animate very well for the most part. I will say there was a couple animation glitches in battle, particularly with Jade for some reason, but for the most part it was very good. The best part of them is how expressive the characters are. The characters are all extremely expressive in the game and just look freaking great. Makes the Akira Toriyama style pop that I just have to mention, everyone has to mention in Dragon Quest reviews. The expressions are the best part of the characters for sure. Everyone animates well as well. Like, it was all really good animation as a whole. As a whole though, The graphics, I thought they were pretty great. They weren't the most realistic or anything, or the most stylized like Persona 5, but I think they were really nice on the eyes at least. There is pre-rendered cutscenes which just look incredible, like these really just look amazing. There isn't that many in the game, but they look great. The frame rate was generally good. While initially loading up an area, the frame rate wasn't the best, but after it finished loading up, it ran at a fine 60. Yes, it's locked to 60, but generally it was good. Something that wasn't that great was actually the PC port. Yes, I played the game on PC, and to be honest, I'd recommend any other version of the game. I'd recommend the Switch version first, but either way, I'd say just stay away from the PC version if you have a choice. It's not terrible, but it wasn't that great. It didn't support my resolution. The patch to fix it just didn't work. The game had some frame drops due to this, and it had some lame performance. In fact, for some reason, the game used all of my GPU. Like, I have no idea why, but it used literally 99 to 100% of my GPU. No normal game should do that, and this game isn't exactly graphic intensive, so I have no idea why it did that. It just wasn't the best optimized. Now, when it comes to sound in Dragon Quest XI, I'll be honest, it kinda sucks. Yeah, it actually kinda sucks. The sound effects are all good in the game. It's mostly standard Dragon Quest sound effects, and everything sounds powerful enough. It's what you would expect, in all honesty, with plenty of classic sounds still in there. There is voice acting in the game, and there is a lot of it. The voice acting I thought was actually really good. It's mostly English voice actors, but I still thought it was very good. Everyone really does try, and the main characters really are actually good. Everyone has a great range of emotions, and I just think everyone was able to get their point across effectively. There was heart put into it, and it was quite wholesome many times. When it comes to the other non-party member characters, it was pretty generic and nothing special. Nobody stood out, and everyone was just there. It was exactly what you would expect for a JRPG side character. Oh, please, help me in my town, or whatever it is. Now, the part of the sound that sucks is the music. I'm sorry, but the music in this game is just awful. Let me explain myself. All the music in this game is bad because it's all MIDI files. Basically, it's at most like 45-second tracks that are repeated, like everywhere, and there isn't that many tracks or themes either. There's a generic battle theme, a generic dungeon theme, and a generic forest theme, and those three themes you will hear like almost the whole game. There is a few other tracks in the game, like the crafting music or the boss music, but a majority of the game is those three previously mentioned themes, and they weren't totally awful the first couple hours. Try that for like 50 hours. Yeah, it was not good. They get old incredibly fast, are not very catchy they're just not catchy for the right reasons, and they're MIDI files. They're terrible. Basically what this means is every song, like anywhere, is 25 seconds to like 30 to like 50 seconds, and then it just repeats. It just comes off as incredibly cheap feeling and draining. It's extremely draining. Literally when any other music plays in the game, I'm like, oh, something different finally. So the other themes I can't properly judge when compared to the main three, but those main three, oh man, do they just degrade your ears. They just get so old. I cannot believe Smash put this crap in. It's not catchy, it has terrible horns, and I just think in terms of music, when compared to its peers, it doesn't hold a candle. Not even to other Square Enix games like Kingdom Hearts 3 or Final Fantasy 15, which are just as modern as this. It pales in comparison to even the other Dragon Quest games, spin-offs included. What a joke. It's like the first few times I heard the themes in the game, I was like, oh, this is okay, I guess. But like even by the halfway mark of the game, I was like, wow, this is really bad. Like really, really bad. I eventually just turned the music off and literally played like any other music because it was just so grating and awful. Now there is a mod that adds the orchestrated music, which sounds better. It isn't the MIDIs and just sounds nicer. It's what the Switch version has, the better music. Anything's better than the originals, honestly. I just can't properly like describe how bad the music gets, like how grating it gets. It's like the area doesn't matter, the type of battle doesn't matter, the boss, nope. It's the same three damn themes and it sucks. It's not dynamic, it's just very poor. There was one track in the game that I will say was good. I will give it that. It plays in one area, the Hoto theme. It's a nice track, it isn't overdone, and that's it. It's decent enough. In the end, I really became to loathe the music, and that's my final stance on that. So Dragon Quest XI seems like a really good standard game, and you know, for the most part it absolutely is. I think the game has many strengths to it, but what game would just have strengths and no weaknesses? Dragon Quest XI has a few weaknesses to it, and I think it's time to go over them. other than the bad music. First off, the intro can be a little long-winded. It's a JRPG, so of course it's got to go a bit slow at the start, but I thought I'd mention it regardless. My next issue would have to be the side quests in the game. The side quests in Dragon Quest XI are just not the best. Not only are they extremely basic, but the rewards I got just generally did not make them feel worth it at all. Now, I didn't do every side quest or even a third of them, to be honest, but I did quite a few of them and found them all to be way too basic for their own good. I didn't find them rewarding in the slightest and saw basically no reason to do them. The rewards just did not seem worth it, as it was just gear or recipes that was usually worse than my current stuff, and so I was just dissatisfied with the side quests, and you don't even get XP from them either, so there was even more reason to not do it. But in fairness, they are side quests and you don't actually have to do them. My next one is the crafting can feel underutilized. I just didn't feel it was used as much as I should have been using it because the rewards just weren't worth it. Maybe that was just me, but I didn't think they had anything really that great. My next issue is more of a bigger one that isn't something optional, and that is grinding. Dragon Quest is kind of notorious for lots of grinding, and I'll say Dragon Quest XI is expertly paced in terms of pretty much everything until the very end. I'd say 90 to 95% of the game is expertly paced, and I never actually had to do any grinding, really. I was more than fine. It wasn't even hard, in all honesty. I would say a majority of the game is fairly easy. However, the true final boss of the game is not messing around. I had to do some serious grinding, actually, at the very end of the game, just to get my core stats up. Maybe that's on me for not doing some basically endgame bonus dungeons, but they were just repeating old dungeons, and I still had to do very serious grinding, like a few hours worth of grinding. That wasn't fun, like, at all, but that is the very end of the game, to be fair. But that's honestly my biggest issue with the game, is that the very end can be a bit of a grind fest, but that in itself is a common JRPG trapping. Speaking of common JRPGs, it seems like the most brought up negative, air quotes here, about the game is that it just sticks to the basic JRPG formula. Like I said earlier, I have no issue with that, and I think what it does very well. However, for some people that is not enough. The game needs to do more than that. It needs to be more than a bit standard. It needs innovation, a unique twist, or a really gripping, thought-provoking story to make up for being a standard RPG. But Dragon Quest does none of that, as it tries its very best to be a traditional JRPG and have a good, generally wholesome story. And credit where credit is due, it does that in spades. It feels like a classic JRPG with some modern touches that make it feel better, such as no random encounters, sans boat, or the ability to run around. And while it seems Final Fantasy continues to innovate and try new things, Dragon Quest just honestly relies on its laurels even more to stay as traditional as possible, and you gotta commend that to some degree. I mean, it's pretty astounding that 25 plus years later, it really is still very similar to the original iteration. It really depends on the type of gamer you are, though, and your stance towards JRPGs. If you don't like JRPGs, or are pretty mixed about, like, just JRPGs in general, then Dragon Quest XI is probably not the game for you. But if you like JRPGs, oh, this is a must-play. I think no game in the last 5 to 10 years has done a traditional JRPG as well as Dragon Quest XI. This game was just excellent throughout. It's very wholesome, and it's just generally a feel-good game, and this is just a great choice to play through. The game is also really long. It took me around 55 hours to beat, but I know it usually takes around 60 to 80 hours to beat the game for most people. I went a bit fast. It's a really long game is what I'm getting at, but it's a really good game is also what I'm getting at. Heavily recommend the Switch version for all its little bonuses, but the bottom line is the game is worth playing. While it's not the most original game, of course, it is Dragon Quest, and it's Dragon Quest through and through, and there's no other way I'd rather have it. Arguably the king of classic JRPGs. I certainly had a good time with it. It took me many months to beat the game, but I still had a great time with it. Or if you want to see what this hero business is all about, get his game. Check it out. Regardless, I hope you like the game as much as I do. Speaking of like, if you liked the video and you've made it this far, thank you so much. That is mega appreciated on every level. If you like Dragon Quest, tell me why you like Dragon Quest, and if you have no idea what the hell Dragon Quest still is, you could tell me that too. If you like the video, like, comment, subscribe, dislike, whatever it is. wouldn't mind anything, would love everything actually. Just do anything. Would love any interaction. Everyone have a great Christmas. See you later.